Hey, King.
Hello, dear.
What's new, buddy?
31 and 31. Playing some demo games because PAX East, all the games that would have been previewed there all became demo games on Steam for free,
Nice.
which was pretty sweet. So we played a bunch of games I was interested in. Sweet new shirt.
Nice.
I don't know, man. Talked to Edgar the other day. Edgar got another resin printer. And he showed me what he was working on, and I was like, I hate you. Those are so cool looking. What else? Did some yard work, not just on Stardew Valley, but actual yard work. Oh, I'm gonna smoke some ribs this weekend and probably a pork butt.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. Oh, did I say 31 and 31?
You did.
I don't even know anymore. I'm
Yeah.
lost. The world is a
Okay.
vampire.
We've both been watching horror movies.
We have. You've really stepped out of your comfort zone and went
Dude.
right into the meat of it.
I, upon your suggestion and other suggestions, have been watching every single Hammer film, and
Singer?
they have been legit, dude. They have been so amazing. I'm incredibly pumped for them.
I bet you really are.
I am. But yeah.
You want to tell me about them?
Yeah, I mean, I think I put the review of the first one on Heel Turn, and I thought I would just bring that up, but then definitely can talk about the others that I've been watching. A couple of folks have chimed in. Brian Sager, our good friend, formerly Tiki God Monster manager to the stars, and now East Coast home skillet. It's been good. I've been watching them out of order, but Yo Randy, John Woolley, and let's see who else. Sager chimed in. Quite good.
Well, give me the lowdown.
First one I watched, suspenseful, shorter than I thought, or shorter than I imagined. Great cinematography and use of color desaturation for cutscenes. 0 kills, plenty of suspense whether someone would touch this. I think that is a theme that carries through. Really vibrant colors, beautiful cinematography.
Repetitive lines. There's a lot of repeating lines. I wonder if that's like a theme.
Monsters and monster ladies. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
I know you like your thick with 2 C's.
Also, all of the costuming is phenomenal. The dancing is great. Yeah. 2 thumbs way up.
2 thumbs cut completely off.
Yeah.
By the IRS.
You could say Hammer Films. Hey, you know what I'm saying? So I got to figure out what comes after those, because I'm running out of Hammer Films, and they're not very long, so I can usually get a couple in a day.
There's definitely not 31.
What's that?
There's definitely not 31.
No, but I don't know. I thought maybe I just branch out into some of Hammer's contemporaries and see what I could see. I think there's a lot of really interesting West Coast.
Kane
What's
series?
that?
Maybe the Kane series?
Yeah, definitely could do that. I think that there's a lot of people that I could jump into, but that's neither here nor there. I'm not a huge horror fan, but I've thoroughly enjoyed this entire au revoir.
Seems like you have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I started off with Maniac Cop.
Yeah.
Far more prescient than I would have probably thought.
Did you do that with the hopes that you would also watch Maniac Cop 2 and Maniac Cop 3? Okay.
I did.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm trying to do movies I haven't seen before.
Okay.
With the exception of the next movie, everything I watched so far I have not seen before.
Have you seen the late Hammer classic Pumps and a Bump?
Yeah,
Check that out.
yeah, I believe I have.
It's definitely a departure from the rest of his films. Yes.
Maniac Cop had Bruce Campbell, like super young Bruce Campbell. Had a bunch of like horror directors were in it. Had Tom Atkins in it. Tom Atkins is generally awesome. Yeah, Robert Zadar as the titular Maniac Cop. Not as cool, like zombie looking in the first movie.
Yeah.
It was definitely like there were stuff where I was like, this is I feel weird watching this. Probably shouldn't watch it during this time period, so I will not be watching the next two flicks. I watched Mask of the Red Death.
No Maniac Cop 2 and 3 then.
No, I planned on it, but then after watching that and just felt weird about it, I was like, I'll pass on those for now. Mask of the Red Death with Vincent Price. I'd seen that before. I love that movie. Again, probably a little more prescient than I realized as I watched it. If you watch it, it's a great allegory for now. Prince Prospero is in the White House, if you think about it hard enough. Especially after his super spreader event.
The question is he wearing a mask?
We both know the answer to that question.
The
next one.
I don't know whether Prince Sabaro wears a mask or not.
Prospero, he does not.
Yeah. Potato, tomato.
Well, Vincent Price would disagree with you, even from the grave. Then my wife and I watched a movie called Scare Me.
Yeah. Did it indeed scare you?
No, it was really entertaining though, except for probably like the last 10 to 15 minutes. It kind of went off the rails a little bit. It was just like about two writers holed up in a cabin during a storm, and then
you told me about that.
Them telling the stories, but like it kind of acting out a little bit. There's like it's minimalistic. They're like interrupting each other's stories.
And you said the really pizza guy shows up, and he
the pizza guy, the pizza guy's like, "Oh, I got a scary story." And for a little bit, I thought it was going to be like, have you ever seen Twilight Zone the movie?
What movie?
Twilight Zone the movie with Dan Aykroyd at the beginning.
Nope.
I can't remember Albert Brooks. It's Albert Brooks and Dan Aykroyd in a car.
Yeah.
And Dan Aykroyd gets picked up. He's a hitchhiker.
Yeah.
And they're talking about scary stuff. Oh, if I shut the lights off while we're driving in the dark, it's pretty scary. And Dan Aykroyd's like, "You want to see something really scary?" And Albert Brooks is like, "Well, yeah, I guess." And he's like, "Okay, if you're sure you want to see something really scary." So he goes, "Okay." He goes, "Hold on a second." He leans over in the car and he kind of moves around a little bit and he jumps. He's a fucking monster and eats him. The car swerves off the road and the Twilight Zone music plays and the shot pans up. It's really good.
I will say I watched a couple other horror movies with Dan Aykroyd in it with my 31 for 31. Ghostbusters 1 and 2, also Blues Brothers. Boom.
Well, it does have Nazis in it, so I'll count it. I watched Bliss.
They're also on a mission from God.
Yeah, true. I watched Bliss. Concept was interesting. There was a lot of nudities for the sake of nudity, I felt like. Yeah, it was all right. It was good. The Siren, which Cassandra was like, "What were you watching? What kind of foreign language movie were you watching?" There was like singing, was like chanting. I was like, I don't think it was foreign language movie, but when your primary character is mute, it makes things very interesting. It was a very urban legendy as far as cryptozoological, and it was a love story. It reminded me a lot of the movie Spring, and Spring I really enjoyed. Not as polished as Spring was. Spring was really good, and the special effects in that movie are fantastic. I then watched Hatchet because I'd heard good things about it, how it was a throwback to 80s slasher movies and just kind of, again, hits all the high points with a lot of interesting stuff. It was okay. I was waiting to be blown away, and I was not blown away. So I don't think I'll probably watch any of the sequels because I was like, well, this is just a dumb slasher. And if I want to watch a dumb slasher, I'll watch one that's actually very self-aware and is fun.
Like one of the Hammer films.
Sure. I watched We Are What We Are, which was
Jenny
very
Green.
good. It was about a family with an alternative religious belief where they commit cannibalism like once a year after a fast because their family had settled that land and had to perform cannibalism to get through the first winter. So the mom dies, and so the father's left alone with the three kids and is trying to get this done. And the girls are, one's outside of high school and one's in high school, and they get to the point where after they have to butcher the meat, they're like, I'm not doing this anymore. Why are we doing this? What's going on? And yeah, it was okay. Very much a character drama. It doesn't really get bloody till the very end. And even that, you're kind of like, well, that's messed up, but it's not like spouts of blood and lots of gore. It's just kind of like, this is what it is. Watched Digging Up the Marrow, which was also by the guy who did Hatchet. It was a mockumentary. It was okay. It's about this guy who's for sure that there's like everybody who's horribly disfigured has like come together and formed these societies underground. And he's convinced the guy who made Hatchet is playing himself. His production team, like, this is a real thing. And he goes and he tries to debunk it, but then he realizes, oh, this is a real thing. We've seen monsters. That's terrifying. Better Watch Out, which is a Christmas movie, ostensibly, was very good. I had the twist spoiled for me.
Yeah.
So I could kind of see it coming, but it's this crazy like babysitter home invasion movie with a hardcore Home Alone twist. It was enjoyable.
I watched a Christmas movie as part of my horror films. Jingle All the Way 2. Jingle All the Way 2. It was horrible.
Fair. One of the only Carpenter movies I haven't seen, I watched Body Bags, which is an anthology that he did with Toby Hooper. It was all right. Not great, but it was entertaining. Carpenter was like your crypt keeper character in the in-between, and you could tell he was having a lot of fun with that, so that was neat.
I have to say that my favorite Carpenter work is
Jesus.
probably We've Only Just Begun. Have you seen that?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
I watched Prevenge, which was really good. The woman who stars in it wrote it and directed it. She was the main female character on Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, and you can see a lot of that twisted humor in it. It is, yeah, I got you. I got it. The whole premise is that she's pregnant, the father has died, and the baby is telling her to kill all the people that were involved in the father's accidental death.
Whoa.
It is like kind of mania in the middle of pregnancy taken to like a homicidal end. It's pretty interesting. There's a couple times where bad things happen and she's like, we didn't have to do that. And the baby's like, yeah, we did. That guy's name was Josh. You don't think Josh is going to tell the police? Someone named Josh is always going to tell the police. I watched Hulu's version of The Books of Blood based on Clive Barker's short story. I love those series of short stories that intertwine into themselves. I had seen a movie based on the actual Book of Blood story within there. Hulu did a decent job. It was entertaining enough. They definitely got the special effect of the dead writing on his skin right. And then yesterday I watched Die Monster Die, which stars Boris Karloff. It's an American International Picture and Color Scope that is a very, very, very bad interpretation of H.P. Lovecraft's The Color Out of Space. However, it's creepy and Karloff's in it. and I enjoyed it for what it was. So that's where I'm at right now. My movie, I'm halfway through a movie. It Comes at Night, which I had heard very mixed things about. Um, a lot of people had felt like it was a very much a bait and switch movie because of the ads for it. I went in knowing that, so I have my expectations are a little different, I think. And so far, it's been pretty good. I want to say it's Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell's son might be the lead actor in it. If it's not, he must be Dennis Quaid's son because he looks like Dennis Quaid.
Quaid.
The Dennis Quaid and oh man, I just said a name and I can't remember.
Is Dennis Quaid the one that's gone crazy MAGA?
No, I think it was his brother that went crazy.
Randy.
Randy Quaid.
Yeah.
Like he went full blown crazy. I don't know
Also,
if he went MAGA.
Did you see Ice Cube too?
What?
Cube. Yeah, nice. Not Ice-T. Yeah, Ice Cube.
If Ice-T did it, he could say it's not personal, it's business. It's just business, simply business.
I built a fence, so
got that going for you.
That's what I've been doing. Hasn't been a whole lot of horror outside of Hammer Films and the Carpenters, but you know that's okay. Been gearing up for other fun things. We taped episode 90 of D&DDT with one and only Tasty Boys.
Tasty Boys.
So that was pretty exciting.
Joel Edgerton. It's not either related to either one of those people, but he's got a big old beard and looks very much like a grizzled Kurt Russell.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know what you got there.
Interesting little plague movie, I guess. Like there's a plague and this family's holed up at this house, and it starts out like the wife's father has it, so they kill him, they burn the body. Like they've taken all this precautions. They're out in the middle of nowhere, and in the middle of one night, someone breaks into this massive house, and they capture him. They tie him up out in the woods. They wait to see if he's infected. He's not, and he's like, "Hey, I didn't know anybody was here. I'm just trying to find water because my kid and my wife are dying. And not of the plague, we're starving."
Damn.
The dude's like, "Do you know what happened? What's going on?" He's like, "I have no clue. As soon as things started to get weird, we left." But there's all these little lies that seem, or miscommunications that seem to come out of this guy's mouth. And the main character is ultra suspicious. And his son is, I don't know. He's like 17 and he's kind of struggling with everything. And this guy and his wife and his kid show up, and his wife's really young. And the son is kind of like eyeing her up, and there's kind of the feeling she might be eyeing him up as well. There's just a lot of weird combustible elements because it's like going really well on the surface, and then underlying there's this, you're waiting for the bottom to drop out between these two families who are now sharing space, food, water, safety.
Which one is that?
It's called It Only Comes at Night.
Oh, gotcha.
It's been, like I said, okay. Not Kurt Russell. But Joel Edgerton kind of looks like Kurt Russell in this movie.
So, I mean, I've always had this question for people that do enjoy horror, and I think especially with, some of the things that you had to say about some of the earlier movies that, with everything going on.
This movie's a bad choice right now, too.
I mean, I'm curious. We talk about this as like the heels guide to survival, even though I don't think that we mentioned that at all at the beginning. But I mean, do you find that there's something about making it through these kind of horrible situations that make you feel better about your situation, or is it the kind of tension and kind of some sort of catharsis that comes out of it? I mean, is there something about horror films or kind of suspense thrillers in particular that that you're drawn to, that can you like articulate what that is, or is it just kind of something you grew up with?
I did grow up with it. It was a huge like part of my relationship with my dad. Um, he probably let me see some movies way earlier than I should have, like Halloween, the movie with Anthony Hopkins called Magic. There's a reason I don't like puppets. It's because I saw that movie when I was probably about 7, and it scared the shit out of me. I also saw Jaws when I was probably about 5 or 6, and it has drastically affected the way I look at the ocean. Um, but I mean, so at the time when I was really young and we first moved to the town I grew up in, my dad had left or was leaving. I can't remember if he was leaving or he was just taking a hiatus. I have a really bad memory, but he wasn't doing law enforcement for that period of time. He was running a liquor store that my mother's father owned. So we would go to the liquor store on Saturdays and hang out in the back, and there was a black and white TV, and we would watch basically like thriller theater with my dad. And a lot of times it was like Godzilla and Mothra, and I love kaiju movies because of that. But sometimes it was like Hammer flicks, and then occasionally it was stuff like The Omen. And you know, when you're little, that stuff sticks with you. Like I had a real like, probably even through high school. It didn't help that my dad, like I said, went back into law enforcement. My grandfather was chief of police for like 30 years. We had a serial child murderer when I was young that went through that town, raped and killed a bunch of kids, threw them over the dike into the river. That they were both involved in finally apprehending. Who called from the county with his phone calls, would call both my dad and my grandpa to say he was going to get off, he was going to get out, and then he was going to use all this horrible shit. So between like that and Halloween especially, this is probably one reason I love John Carpenter. I find that when
Wait, you were talking about John Carpenter?
Yeah.
Oh, I was talking about Karen Carpenter.
I know, hard for you to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
I find that like going back and looking at like Halloween and Texas Chainsaw Massacre was another one I saw way too young. When I was a kid, I thought, oh my God, so much blood, so much, oh, so this and that. When I saw them when I was older, I was like, there's no blood in these movies. Like they're pretty bloodless, but they hit you with so much tension and this inevitable sense of doom. And you know, reading more about Carpenter and getting very much into like, there was a time period when I was young where I was like, I want to make movies. And I was super into those horror directors. You know, I had a really cool art teacher in school who was like, let me work at his haunted house and I get to do stuff, you know, make stuff. And it was something I was interested in for a really long time. But listening to Carpenter talk about how Halloween was originally a Western, the villain is coming, the villain is coming, the villain is here. Those are 3 acts. And he's a huge Western fan. He grew up on Westerns. Howard Hawks is his favorite director. Hearing how like you can take something and just ratchet tension up. Same thing with like Alien. I saw Alien when I was really young. I saw Aliens when I was in middle school, and it scared the shit out of me because, again, there was just so much tension. Cameron does that great job in that movie of taking everything that Ridley Scott did in the first movie, which was tell, don't show, almost like Jaws. And when you see that monster periodically, it scares you. Like, you know it's there, but you don't see it. You see hands. Occasionally you see the head. You don't see enough because when you see the whole monster towards the end of the movie, you're like, oh, it's a guy in a suit. Yeah. Okay. He goes like this. And I'm like, oh, it's a guy in a suit and Sigourney Weaver's in her underwear and there's a cat. Why was I so freaked out earlier? You don't see the monster enough and it works so well. But what Cameron did was go, well, I got this big budget, all monsters. let me just not. There's not one monster. There's hundreds of them. So remember how dangerous that one was? What happens when there's thousands of them? And it's just like this flood of like no one gets out alive. And that I like when people take those things and they twist them and they assault your senses by paranoia, and it's why The Thing's my favorite movie of all time. I don't think any movie has ever done so much with so little when it comes to a movie that's incredibly sparse, but the reds and blues in that movie are so bright. Lens flares, the starkness of the white outside, the sparseness of dialogue. Like one of the things that like Siskel and Ebert, who hated that movie when it came out, said was, "Oh, well, the characters are just cardboard cutouts. They have no character. They're one-dimensional." It's kind of the point of the movie, is they're just a bunch of men who have been stuck together for a long time, and they have kind of distilled down to their roles. They are the tough guy. They are the smart guy. They are that. They've had to be that. That's their role within the group. And once all that, Wilford Brimley guy, mustacheless though. So when it gets all flipped on its head and you don't know if that's who they say they are, it gets really disconcerting. Carpenter has talked about the scene where the dog goes in and infects the first person. They just show you a shadow. And he used an actor that wasn't in the movie to be the shadow. So you couldn't even tell based on body type because it wasn't somebody in the movie. So, all these little things, the way they lit the eyes, there's speculation that the eyes were lit a certain way for people who were infected and for people who weren't. It's like The Shining. There's so many theories. What does this really mean? Movies that are able to do that, Hitchcock does that as well or better than any other director ever, is he just throws you out of whack. He makes you suspend your disbelief. He draws you into the film. He tells you a story and you feel like you're in the story. You feel like you're a part of it. Great movies, suspense, thriller, horror, whatever you want to call it. They do that. Silence of the Lambs is a great example of that. They pull you into a tale where you start to get you're just uncertain. I think great horror doesn't need to be buckets of blood. I just don't think that always, I think there's a place for that. And people are allowed to like whatever they want to like. I don't like torture porn. I don't think that shit doesn't interest me. I didn't like Saw. I don't like Hostel. I don't like any of those movies.
So the question would be for me then, is this, if it's not necessarily about the horror, do you get the same kind of enjoyment from, say, like the Basil Rathbone, like Sherlock Holmes,
Yes.
as you would from some of those? So for
As
you,
long
it's
as
kind of,
as long as it's well acted, that's another key. Because all kidding aside, you were talking about Hammer. One of the things about Hammer that I will always look past the flaws for 3 reasons. The sets look incredible. They're just, again, they put the gothic in gothic horror. They really do. And then it's all about Christopher Lee and it's all about Peter Cushing. I don't care what roles they're playing. I don't care if they're in the movie together. They're both so good that they can carry those movies. They were just outstanding actors.
Yeah.
And I think like Basil Rathbone is a good example of that. I mean, his Sherlock Holmes is pretty iconic. And I think when the stories are written well, when the acting's done extremely well and it can draw you in, suspense is great. I enjoy like the Sherlock television show because of the performance of Benedict Cumberbatch. And it doesn't hurt that Martin Freeman's on that show, and I can't think of who plays Holmes's brother on that. Mark Gatiss. Mark Gatiss is great. There's not bad performances on that show, and I think they have a really smart way of the way they ratchet tension up. So I think that you can get a lot out of those types of things, and that's why I enjoy them. Did you see Knives Out?
Yeah.
Knives Out was great.
Yeah, it was
It
spectacular.
was so fun. There's movies like that, even on the horror end, that where they're not even maybe meant to be comedy horror, but they're just fun. Like I don't
Yeah.
consider Evil Dead at its core comedy horror because I don't think it was meant to be comedy. I mean, it was just meant to be crazy.
Yeah.
And it's fun. That movie is like a roller coaster ride.
It's very gonzo, but not
Yeah,
necessarily like comedy. Yeah.
yeah. I think Army of Darkness, which I
Yes.
absolutely love, is I think they were like they turned a corner and they're like, let's just
Yeah.
have fun.
Yeah.
I think that type of stuff, trying to think like Shaun of the Dead. I think even Hot Fuzz has some horror elements to it, which I think makes it great.
Yeah.
Beyond the Mask, I don't think it intentionally goes into comedy. I think it
Mhm.
again skirts that line, but then it reminds you, much like Shaun of the Dead does, that there's real horror going on here. I just watched another one not too long ago, and all of a sudden I'm forgetting what it was called, and I was like, that falls into that category, where it's like got comedy to it, but it's not necessarily comedy horror. But
Yeah.
I think those things are out there. I think Scare Me has some of that in it as well.
Yeah.
I think it depends on performances. I know you and I were talking about Mark Duplass in Creep.
Yeah.
In both of those movies, he is much like in Behind the Mask. The main characters are the antagonists, but they're so fucking charming and they're so interactive with the audience that you grow to actually like them. And then things start to turn and you're like, oh, whoa, you're doing what?
Yeah.
Those movies like kind of trick you into being on the side of the antagonist.
Yeah.
As someone else was pointing out on a thing I was watching, how much Jason Voorhees is a sympathetic, like, anti-hero. He didn't want to get killed by those shitty kids and ignored by camp counselors who were having, underage sex.
Yeah.
He didn't want that to happen. And he died. And then, mom tries to get revenge. And what happens to mom? She gets her head cut off. So what's a guy living in the woods without mom supposed to do but get revenge?
Yeah. Put teenagers in sleeping bags and slam them against the trees, baby.
Go to space.
Go to space.
I thought that was an interesting way of looking at it. They were like, if you want to talk about anti-heroes, and they were kind of talking about like how Freddy steered that way, but then just became like the one-liners and everything became like ingrained in pop culture, but there's no empathy, there's no sympathy, because if you really look at that, you're rooting for a child molester.
Yeah.
Michael Myers is not someone you root for, and there's a reason that even the bad Halloween movies are good, because Michael Myers doesn't talk. He doesn't have any. Maybe the Rob Zombie ones. I refuse to watch that garbage. He doesn't talk, and he just shows up. Jason Voorhees is the same way, except for when they reveal this very tragic backstory. Whereas Michael Myers has no tragic backstory. It was, hey, as a tiny kid, I decided to stab my babysitter to death. That's it. As Dr. Loomis says, you look behind those eyes and there's nothing there. Some people are just evil, and he is pure evil. So, I think that kind of the reverse hero's journey almost in some of it, I find interesting.
Yeah. Have you watched The One I Love with Mark Duplass and Elizabeth Moss?
The one where they go to the counselor and then they go to the retreat?
Yeah, they go on like a getaway to kind of work on their relationship.
It's great.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet, but it's like on my list.
Watch it immediately. It is fantastic. It takes you in one direction, then moves it to another direction, and then by the end you're like, oh God, what's going on?
So, I mean, if you had to pick kind of like a horror film besides The Thing, just like a kind of example of kind of a horror, more horror than thriller, what would be a kind of example?
What genre are you looking at? Because I think that's the other thing is people look at horror and they forget, much like we talked about this before, you know, the fact that heavy metal is actually a ton of subgenres. Wrestling is a ton of subgenres.
Yeah. I mean, and that's kind of what I'm getting at is like, if we had an example of horror, I'm trying to kind of get at this, you know, like if we're thinking about, right, if we're giving survival tools to people, you know, what is the difference for you in when you should watch a whatever, a Nightmare on Elm Street, or you know, another kind of horror film, like ones that would be under the horror film genre, versus something like Rear Window?
Well, I think the mistakes I've made this year is I've watched
Of which there are many.
Well, of this 31 and 31.
Joking. Dude, it's 2020. It sucks.
Maniac Cop, because I should have enjoyed that movie. Everything about it should have been enjoyable. It was a movie that is like literally built for me to enjoy. Has a lot of people in it I like, and I just left it feeling cringy because of the material.
Yeah.
I love Mask of the Red Death. I think it's probably Corman and Price's best Poe adaptation out of all of them that they did.
Yeah.
But I definitely, when I finished that movie, I was like, ugh, it's a bad choice.
Yeah, I feel that way about some. It's one of the reasons why I find it difficult to engage, because mystery is my favorite genre across the board in general, just like mystery thriller. And so, except for rom-coms, of course, you know, Sweet Home Alabama forever. But for me, I find it really difficult because in the last 20 years, up until recently, the kind of thriller genre bent so hard towards like only like crime, like cop driven thrillers. And it's difficult for me because I don't actually find that as captivating as something like Rear Window, where like the crime is happening, the mystery is happening to someone, which is why I think that like we're very parallel in many of our kind of pursuits for, you know, kind of the survival guide and everything else. We have these kind of similar, you know, kind of tangentially related parallel paths where I'm more maybe I fall more on the thriller mystery. And I think that like our thriller is our overlap, you know, and whereas you veer more into horror, I veer more into kind of, you know, mystery or other kind of sub thriller genres to get our splashes, you know.
Yeah.
But the thriller kind of thing, I think, is, if we were to name this chapter, right?
Would you put Psycho as a horror movie or as a thriller?
That's a really good question. It's so difficult, like, because to me that's like suspense horror, whereas yeah,
my dad used to say Psycho is a ghost story with no ghost. So it's a horror movie.
Yeah.
And I always thought that was kind of an interesting take on it, and that never really jived with me when he and I would have these discussions about stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I would always be, it's a slasher flick. He's like, but is it? How many people get cut up in that movie? 2. And you never see knife penetration, and you know, he had all these other, but he said the real key to that movie is the fact that Norman Bates is haunted. You could even say the house is haunted if you wanted to. The motel is haunted. The presence of his mother is the true driving force of anything evil that takes place there. And after watching The Haunting of Hill House, I think that kind of clicked. I was like, oh God, you know, he was right. That is a ghost story. It's basically a ghost story by the end of it. You could call it a psychological thriller, because he's got that dissociative personality disorder. When he's at the end, he's sitting there, and spoilers, and he's thinking in mom's voice, but there's definitely not so much even a supernatural as just a living in the shadow of your history, living in the shadow of. I don't think a ghost always needs to be like moving plates around.
Yeah.
It's kind of like my feeling about the Babadook. I love the Babadook. It's one of the only horror movies I can think of where I cried, because the whole thing is a metaphor for grief and loss, and putting that grief and loss away at the end. It's if you've suffered great loss, that movie is very, very cathartic and emotional. And some people don't like it, and I don't understand why, but I look at it as like, if you've had that, that definitely gives you a different perspective on what it is, or what it means to you. That's the other a great thing I love about film is about, like any piece of art. I mean, we can say it's about any wrestling match we've watched or any comic book we've read or anything. Art is subjective. It's what you find in the piece. It's what you see that you have a relationship to. And I can see some of those things, and I have a much stronger relationship to them. Rear Window, I love. I haven't seen Vertigo in forever, and I need to watch it again. North by Northwest is another one I haven't seen in a really long time. I think I've watched The Birds maybe 5 times because I find that movie genuinely disturbing.
Yeah.
And again, I would say that's a horror movie.
Yeah.
Not
I
a
would
thriller.
say.
That is a straight up horror movie. So I think Hitchcock, that's kind of to me, Hitchcock is an extreme marker down the center of horror and thriller, because he's able to kind of straddle that line so effectively. Um, so I think, that's always a good question I find to ask people if they're looking, like, if you're trying to figure out what side of the fence they are with horror, is saying,
Yeah.
well, what do you think? A psycho, a horror movie, or is it a thriller? And there's no invalid answer.
Yeah.
I think it's just a matter of like perspective, because like I said, for a long time, I was like, it's a very, very light slasher in the thriller category. But when you watch it and you're like, oh shit, this is a ghost story, it gets a little creepier. It really does. You start to go, oh man, Norman's really kind of a tragic figure in all this.
Mm-hmm.
He's just so broken
Yeah.
by his past and by this presence that's hanging over him oppressively, constantly. It's unavoidable. It's in every wall. It's in every speck of paint. It's in every light. It's just there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's always a good way. Getting back to a question you asked a little bit ago, like what would I recommend? I think if you're looking at thriller, suspense, Hitchcock.
Yeah.
Take your pick. There's not a bad one in the bunch. To me, if you can't enjoy Alfred Hitchcock, then you should just stop watching suspense thrillers, and you shouldn't get into horror.
Yeah.
Because the man was awful to the people he directed, but he was a genius.
Do you feel like, you talked about the Babadook and like suffering great loss? Do you feel like the losses in your life has affected how you view thrillers and horror and suspense as a genre, like maybe even kind of outside of kind of the people that you've lost? Do you kind of, that subjective kind of interpretation, do you view some of those pieces differently after kind of having experienced that, or no?
I look at, and I don't know, maybe I'm alone in this, but there is a mental box, and it's full of things that I associate with certain people. Primarily, I would say the biggest loss is like the loss of my father.
Yeah.
There are entire like Pink Floyd albums I cannot listen to because it's gonna break me. I've never gone back and since he's died and reread John Byrne's Man of Steel miniseries because my dad bought me the first issue of that. Didn't have to. Not a big fan of me collecting comics, but he knew it was important. Knew how much I liked John Byrne because even though he didn't like that, he knew who John Byrne was just from conversation. So he picked it up one time for me, and it just meant the world that he would do that. So going back and rereading that, I think would be really hard.
Yeah.
I don't think I've touched a Joseph Campbell book since he died. That was something we very much shared. For 1 year for Christmas, I gave him Bullfinch's Mythology because his old copy was so fucked up. He gave me Power of Myth 1 year, and I don't open it. It's way too hard. Horror movie wise, Lion in Winter was his favorite movie, and I have not watched it since he passed because I associate that with him too much. Shit, I still say things like, "When the king's offers arse, no one sleeps." It's a line from that movie. I grew up hearing that all the time. There are things I will never go back and read The Deer Slayer or any of those movies, Last of the Mohicans, or any of those books. I won't watch Last of the Mohicans again because my brother's nickname growing up was Natty Bumpo. He was that until he was about 5. We were down in my parents' basement working on a project, and my dad was like, "Bumpo, get that for me." And my brother turned and looked at my dad at 5 years old and goes, "I'm not Bumpo." He was like, "What?" He goes, "I'm the Duke. You can call me the Duke." And I think that came from, and my brother's never like admitted to where it came from, but I think it's from Escape from New York.
That's funny.
Because Isaac Hayes was the Duke of New York.
Yeah.
A number 1. So, yeah, my brother was Natty Bumpo and I was Newt the Goose.
Nice.
So, things like that. But when it comes to like horror movie stuff, I think, when it comes to movies overall, I have a hard time watching all of the Monty Python stuff because that was stuff that, we shared. I didn't get into Mystery Science Theater first. That was him. That was him, and he was recording them on VHS tapes and sending them to me. I don't watch Mystery Science Theater as much as I used to. It's been a lot harder because I just kind of, it gets to be a hollow experience sometimes. Not to mention, I think I've seen every episode like 10 times. But I think like Jabberwocky, Time Bandits, Meaning of Life, Life of Brian. The only one I've watched since is
Holy Grail.
Holy Grail. It's just not, like I said, they're all kind of in that box. I don't know if they'll ever get out of that box.
Yeah.
And there's other things that are in there, and other music and other, books and things like that. But we shared movies that way. Like my dad was someone who, if Army of Darkness was on and it was going to be on at like 3 a.m, he was like, and he was up, he was going to be like, "I'm gonna watch this movie." He watched it constantly. 1 year for his birthday, I gave him like the ultimate Army of Darkness box set, and it had like 4 versions of the movie in it.
Yeah.
They all had like different endings, and he wore that thing out. Predators, not Predator, but the one with Danny Glover. That was another one where I was just like, really? But we would watch it and I'd be like, okay, this is a solid flick. The ending especially is super solid.
Yeah.
But that stuff I don't think we were as tight about. We would talk about it. We'd watch them, enjoy them, and talk about it. But we never really, it wasn't like books and it wasn't like music. Music for he and I would be a lot of like, "Have you heard this? Gotta listen to this, right? What are you doing right now? Put it down, listen to this." Mystery Science Theater was that way too, just for the mere fact it's so quotable.
Yeah.
So, I would get a call from him, and rather than me, I would say hello, and all I would hear, "You tried to kill me with a forklift," things like that. It just,
yeah.
So I don't really have, maybe The Shining. I really haven't gone back and watched that. Maybe once since he died. That's definitely one he and I'd sit down and watch multiple times together because he loved Stanley Kubrick's films. Did not like Stanley Kubrick as a human being, but he was like this is the art versus the artist.
Yeah.
And the first movie the first movie you ever saw in a theater was 2001. You don't remember because you were like one. He's like, we saw that before you saw Star Wars.
Wow.
So like that's another movie I have a lot of affinity for because it's another one that whenever it was on, we would sit down and watch it together. Which is also an interesting. Again, I just read an article about like, is 2001 a horror movie? And
I think so.
Yeah, it gets real trippy at the end. I think it's an existential horror.
Yeah, it's like suspense horror.
Yeah, I actually look
Like
at it as
Moon. Have you ever watched Moon?
Yes, excellent flick.
Moon is one of the few movies that I actually own on Blu-ray. Because I love it.
I believe that's based on a Russian movie.
I think so too. But yeah, that's such a, to me, I enjoy that movie as much, if not more than 2001. I think that's probably a generational difference, but
probably just amount of viewing.
Yeah.
I mean, like Night of the Living Dead scared me when I was a kid to the point where I had problems like, oh, there's a cemetery over on North Cottonwood Street. Guess what? I will not drive by it when it's dark on my bike. Got to get all the way over to South Cottonwood.
Yeah.
But like Dawn of the Dead, I think I've watched that movie a billion times because I was a little older and it didn't hit me in that same spot. Like I said, Halloween hit me in that spot where like the closet in my room that I shared with my brother, the door had to be shut. And I generally would put something in front of the door. So if someone opened that door, I would hear it.
Yeah.
Because my brother was and is a sleepwalker, a pretty avid sleepwalker.
Yeah.
And I would like wake up and he would be walking around and talking, but he would be asleep. And that will scare the shit out of you.
Yeah, no kidding.
So even when we had bunk beds and he was on top, he would just get down. We would find him in the front yard occasionally. One time he was sitting on the landing upstairs and he was doing all the stuff and my parents woke him up. But before they woke him up, they asked him, what are you doing? He said, 4th of July. And he was moving his hands like he had a sparkler in his hand.
Wow.
Yeah. And we both always had I had night terrors really bad when I was super young. And then I just kind of didn't have a whole lot of dreams, I guess. I wouldn't have nightmares. He had bad nightmares and night terrors and sleepwalking. But once I started taking meds to sleep, now I have these hyper vivid dreams. And probably about 6-7 years ago, I started having sleep paralysis off and on. So, which
I never had night terrors, but I did have night moves.
But getting back to that question, what would I recommend? All the way back.
I don't think I ever asked you to recommend something. I was wondering. I wanted to get at that question of if you chose kind of a horror example, if you put it next to Rear Window, it was kind of that thriller, suspense, horror mystery.
I would ask you then, as someone who doesn't really enjoy horror, taking Hitchcock out of the equation, what are 5 horror movies you would recommend to someone and why?
Oh, that's a good question. Moon. I would put Moon kind of at the top of that.
Why?
I'm big. What's that?
Why? What is your reasoning behind each film?
To me, that falls into that psychological thriller kind of horror, that kind of suspense. In a certain way, it's like if Total Recall would have not been so inadvertently funny. That there's
some Oz.
You know what I'm saying? But to me, Total Recall is a horror movie. It's science fiction, but to me, that's a horror movie.
I don't know if I agree with that.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I think it's no. I think it's very much, in the vein. Even though Verhoeven, I think he definitely did his take on it. But if you read that story, and I think it's a Philip K. Dick story.
Yeah.
Um, it's kind of an interesting, like, I don't know. I think Philip K. Dick had this way of taking the best of like Raymond Chandler, like gritty noir detective, and sticking it in a and turning into what would be called cyberpunk.
Sure. Yeah.
I think that's a little bit of that. I mean, I almost feel like Verhoeven's movie is like James Bond in space.
I mean, you know what number 2 is then. I mean, you just mentioned space. Jason 10, the greatest of all of the Jason films. Um,
I also don't disagree with that. I love that movie. It's so bad, it's good.
it's to me, it is so self-aware that I can't get over how it's the same reason why I always make the Sweet Home Alabama joke. Sweet Home Alabama is at the same time a terrible movie and like the most complete rom-com because it's like so self-aware that it's like when someone says, when someone at your job asks you to do that job, rather than questioning it, do it to the best of your ability. That is what like Sweet Home Alabama and Jason 10 are to me. They are saying,
Yeah.
okay, like we're going to make the horror trope so well done that it's going to like transcend this movie being the trope installation in the series.
I
Um,
think it's a lot like Scream in the fact that it's deconstructionism,
mhm.
but it's without the. And I like the first Scream movie, but I do think that sometimes Wes Craven is like very or was very pretentious,
Mhm.
but only pretentious about a movie when people were like, "Oh, the underlying meanings are this, right?" And it was like, "Yeah, yeah, that's exactly what it is." It was like an interview I watched with two horror directors. I can't remember who was interviewing them, but the guy was like, "So," he was like, "I hate when horror directors go are getting interviewed, and the interviewer goes, so there, I noticed there's a lot of mirrors in your film. Like, is that purposeful? And what does it mean?" And they're like, "I'm glad you noticed that because," and you can see the bullshit wheel spinning.
Yeah.
There is nothing about that. It's just there. It's an aesthetic choice, and it works. And I think sometimes Wes Craven would definitely feed into that. Um, so I think Jason 10 is one where they're just like, we're gonna reference the fuck out of every Jason movie ever. And we're gonna just be balls out crazy, and this is gonna be so enjoyable because there's so many callbacks to not just Jason movies, but like to every movie with space marines and dumb teenagers. It just has a little bit of everything in it. It's a
Yeah.
potpourri of
Yeah.
Jason.
Um, I would also, I mean, I can throw out any of the kind of horror comedy movies that we've already talked about, but
Well, give it your best one though, and why?
well, I'll name one that we haven't named, but that I absolutely love and I would watch over and over again is Fido.
That's a great flick.
It's like Pleasantville mixed with like the like Romero zombie films. It's just like the most bizarre. And again, I think that I tend to err on the side of these kind of like weird subversions of the genre that like remove some of the things that like I find jarring. Whether that's kind of more slasher or like other things. But yeah, Fido, when I first saw that, I was like, I literally watched it again immediately. I was just like I was so intrigued by it, and I thought it was so well. It was gorgeous, in all of the ways that kind of the weird, kind of nostalgia films of that time were kind of doing these kind of really cleaned up. I don't know. I think about like Truman Show or like Stepford Wives or like that kind of porcelain, kind of pastel aesthetic, and then like all of the blood and gore was like so like dark and grotesque against that palette that it was just yeah, it was really
And it's
um
bizarrely heartwarming.
oh yeah, it absolutely is.
That's why, again, I know you haven't seen it, and I've said it a couple times, but I would highly recommend the movie Spring.
Mm.
It's Oh, Cassandra watched it eventually with me because I kept saying, it's really kind of a romance movie.
Yeah.
And it is. It's just inside of a horror movie. And
Yeah.
by the end, you feel this kind of there's just this wonderful kind of heartwarming story in it.
Yeah. We've talked about this before, and I know that we've talked about whether this is like horror, suspense, thriller, et cetera, but I think that it operates in the same way as like a psychological slasher film, and that's Perfect Blue, which is animated, but
Haven't seen it. I really want to.
it is like, it remains to this day, like when I watch it, I have a hard time getting through it. It's like deeply disturbing to me, in the kind of like psychological suspense horror way. It's like it is that, the villain is coming, the villain is coming, the villain is here kind of Western approach, but in this kind of very glammed up world of kind of popular music and television, and it's
I think J horror across the board, regardless of the format, people have to understand that every country that has built its own sense of horror has done so differently and based it upon their own cultural subtext. And I think Japanese horror especially has an incredibly different and intricate, for lack of a better term, set of rules.
Yeah.
Because you have something like that, or you have something like fucking Audition, which is real hard to get through, especially the ending. But you also have, the vampire trilogy that Toho did in the 70s, which are super wild. I mean, as far as like they're trippy and they've got some hammer elements in them, but I mean, and the idea of vampire in Japan is far different than Western vampire. The Yokai War, or the Yokai Warrior War, I think is what it's called. You can watch it subtitled on YouTube. I love that movie. The whole thing with the spirits, one of the spirits being a umbrella, because like for them, animate objects have spirits, or inanimate objects have spirits. It's very like in like with their culture, and this idea that these spirits are protecting this house against an outside spirit that wants to destroy not just the people in the house, but the house itself and consume everything. It's fascinating. And the special effects, again, that's like a 70s movie that still stands up. The special effects are gorgeous. The characters are interesting. I think, even like Del Toro's work when he was still in Mexico, Cronus, I think if you go back, and Devil's Backbone, those movies have such an imprint of his culture and Spanish culture as well, Spanish history, Pan's Labyrinth, that
Pan's Labyrinth like terrified. That like the razor and everything, like that kind of like slight like body horror type, like that stuff for me, like I
touches the nerve.
Like it makes me like, yeah, and that's the reason why I can't do a lot of that kind of horror, because it's so off-putting to me that it like sticks with me, and I have a hard time moving past it in a lot of cases. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I tend more towards thriller, mystery style horror.
Did you enjoy The Shape of Water?
Yeah, immensely.
Okay. To me, one thing Del Toro does in an amazing fashion is he shows you the juxtaposition of what we call a monster,
yeah,
compared to the monsters of actual humanity.
Yeah.
And the gentleman who played the officer in Pan's Labyrinth, Michael Shannon in The Shape of Water, those individuals are terrifying.
Yeah. No, it's the real monsters. It's the human monsters that I find terrifying, which is why I can watch sci-fi and I can watch, fantasy, and I can watch all of that, and that I will indulge in and enjoy It's not the kind of grotesque that in kind of an otherworldly monster fashion that upsets me. It's the humanity. It's kind of revealing these kind of horrible aspects of kind of what humans can do to one another, that it just kind of I it triggers like a gag reflex for me, of like I can't, if I can believe that there are people that do that, or that is something that could be like present, in my own community, or something like that. It just those genuinely terrify me, and not in a good way, not in a way that when I get done I can leave it.
Yeah.
I think that that's why true crime sometimes ends up being so addictive to people. And I'm no different. Mysteries. Kind of, I like historical fiction. Mystery, crime, that kind of thing. Elmore Leonard, I read a lot of when I was younger, and I really, yeah, I really got into that. But I think that that's, another one of those aspects, that there's a lot of conversation about, true crime, and it's kind of it's exploitation of the victims. We had a conversation about this too, previously, but yeah, it's hard. And which brings me to number 5, and why I love it so much, and because there is a kind of modern analog to this very old film, and it's another one that we've talked about, and that's Hound of the Baskervilles. It's my favorite.
Which
I think it's
version?
no, and this is why I want to talk about it, because I love the 1939 film, 39, something like that, the 30s film. But I also love the modern, Benedict Cumberbatch, Mark Gatiss. I loved both of those approaches to them. You
You're
don't
missing the
like
best one.
what's that?
You're missing the best one.
Which one's the best one?
The Hammer one.
Oh, well,
with Cushing as Holmes
yeah.
and Christopher Lee as Henry Baskerville. One of the only times that those characters were in the same movie and not adversaries.
Yeah. When we had talked about that out in the driveway, but I hadn't seen that one. I'd seen the very early one, and then I saw that probably, I don't know, when I was in college, grad school, something like that. Like when I was going back through, and I had bought a collected works of Sherlock Holmes, and I went through and I rewatched, or I reread everything, and then I went back and I rewatched everything.
There's one with Matt Frewer, Max Headroom, basically.
Yeah.
As Sherlock Holmes as well. That's really good. It's one of those kind of flew under the radar type of things. That it's surprisingly good.
Yeah.
Cumberbatch, what can you say? The guy was born to play Holmes.
Yeah, he's great.
Basil Rathbone, I think, sets the bar.
Yeah.
But for that particular story, I think because Hammer does that gothic horror so well, they're just able to pull it all together. And I think with Cushing, he plays Sherlock Holmes, comes off as if he is a distant relative of Cushing's Van Helsing. They're both sort of arrogant.
Yeah.
I would say his Holmes is more arrogant than his Van Helsing.
Yeah.
But they're brilliantly smart. They'll knock your block off if they have to. They're very athletic type of thing, but they're thinkers. They're always looking how they can get ahead in the game, and he plays Holmes so detached, so just, always looking 5 steps forward.
Yeah.
I like that Holmes because there's no desperation in it.
Yeah.
It's almost like he feels like I'm preordained to get this right.
Yeah.
That's why when there's a little bit of doubt about the supernatural ideal of the Hound, it vexes him. He's agitated about it.
Yeah.
As opposed to his
that's the exact terminology for it. Yeah.
As opposed to Cushing as Van Helsing, where there is desperation. There is this constant feeling of I have to do whatever I have to do to kill Dracula.
Yeah.
He is a pox on the world, but I know I shouldn't at any point just say, put him up. let's have a throwdown. Even though that happens off and on in those movies, he knows he's overmatched physically. So it's this constant like, what do I need to put in place to stop him? He has to be stopped. And then you add the third kind of component to that is if you ever see him as Victor Frankenstein in any of those movies, the monster is not the frightening person in those movies.
No, it's him.
It's Cushing.
Yeah.
And he is insane.
Yeah.
And he plays it so well as the meticulous planner, with a god complex. And, I think like by the third movie in that series, he's just flat out evil. Like there's no, you could kind of question it in the first one. And then the second one, you kind of feel like he's moving that way. By the third movie, he is the bad guy. Like there's no question about it. He is a manipulative bastard who is doing everything he can to, I think if you've seen any of the Reanimator movies, probably not. Jeffrey Combs gets that same vibe of like, I can't be bothered with your problems. I'm too busy reanimating the dead right now. All that matters is my science. And I'll do whatever I need to do to manipulate whoever I have to manipulate to do my science.
I mean, in some ways, the kind of great irony of this in, like the people that you're speaking about, the kind of monsters that you're articulating from some of these horror films, Sherlock Holmes is the exact same. Their success is inevitable. And it's about the kind of, it's the same thing. It's the hero is coming, the hero is coming, the hero is here. It's just an inversion of that, which is, I think, why, again, right, that kind of like thriller suspense is that line that we walk between us. And I think I end up more on the kind of like, I would rather have the narrative of the hero is coming, the hero is coming, the hero is here, than the villain is coming, the villain is coming, the villain is here.
I can't recall. Did you see Mandy?
No, that's the Nicolas Cage.
Yeah.
No, I haven't had a chance to see it.
So I
haven't taken the time to see it.
I will watch like some like film breakdown videos.
Yeah.
And one of the people I routinely watch who kind of breaks down horror movies, he did a video on how Mandy is the epitome of line for line a film doing the hero's journey. He's like, you can literally point to moments and characters who are the hero's journey within this. That Nicolas Cage's character is going through the proverbial hero's journey.
Yeah.
And I never thought about it, but like as soon as watching it, I was like, holy shit, that's exactly what's happening. That's really like kind of mind blowing throughout that. And it's another reason why I would say, the guy who did the review was like, I watched Mandy the first time and I didn't like it. I was just like, whatever. I watched it another time because a friend said, you're missing the point. Upon rewatch, he's like, I actually realized I really like this movie. He's like, upon third viewing, I started to notice things where I was like, that's genius. He's like, 10 or so viewings in, I was like, this is hero's journey. He's like, here's how. And he was just, he was showing it on his video. But I think like movies like that are so steeped in interesting choices that, like I said, in this particular case, I do think it's not a coincidence. It's done with purpose. I think that makes it extremely interesting, because you're like, and that movie's got some crazy stuff in it. There's some gore in it. I don't think it's overwhelming. There is some really trippy stuff in it. It's the first 45. You don't see the credit for the film until 45 minutes in. You see chapters before that, but you don't see the title of the movie until 45 minutes in. And at that point, it's because things have gone completely sideways. The first 45 minutes are kind of blissful. It's strangely a nice, you're building up this love story between two people. You know, you're showing the viewers how in love these people are, and how it's just kind of a very like lived in relationship. You know, they don't. It's not like they're doing a bunch of crazy stuff. They watch TV together. They read together. Now, there's a whole conversation about what is your favorite planet. And Nicolas Cage's first reaction is Galactus, and she's like, not a planet. But I mean, there's like this very lived-in feel to all of it, and that's why when it goes the way it goes, you're on board. You know, I know that for me, I was like, I'm not a huge like revenge movie person. Like things like I Spit on Your Grave and Last House on the Left and things like that. I kind of fall into your category with some of that, where I'm like, shit like that happens, you know. There's a movie out that's on Shudder. Is it just called Revenge? It's really good, but I watched it once and I was like, man, I would never watch this again. And it's really well done. It's very smart, and the woman who goes for that situation, she definitely gives everybody involved what's coming to them. But I was just like, I feel just not okay watching this. It feels really like good, but not like something I ever need to see again. Whereas something like Mandy, there's so much other shit going on. Just with, is this reality? Is this not reality? Is his mind broken before, or is it broken now? There's little tidbits dropped of like, what were you doing with your life before she came into your life? Because apparently what you were doing was not good. There's even a cut scene that even pushes that further. And it's really, really good because of that. It's a movie like that I don't have that kind of feeling like I need to wash my hands after I've watched it. But it's kind of in that genre a little bit. So I was going to come back. I had a question for you.
Okay.
As someone who, you said, you know, thrillers and crime and things like that more as opposed to horror, where do you fall on something like the first season of True Detective?
I did not watch the first season of True Detective. I did.
Really?
I have not True Detective. Yeah.
Okay.
Mostly an access issue at the time. Some of it is the actors that are part of the different seasons. I don't know. It's just never.
I'm just talking about the first season.
Yeah, I've never kind of pursued it, and I don't. It just has never kind of popped for me, and I'm not sure why.
What about Mindhunter, or Mindhunters, whatever?
We talked about Mindhunter, and I'm now totally drawing a blank on Mindhunter.
It is the Netflix series about the behavioral unit in the FBI, like the beginning of the behavioral unit that is put together to study serial killers, like in the, I can't remember if it was in the late 50s or early 60s. So it's literally based on that in cases. So like the running thing between all seasons has been the BTK killer. So it's whenever he started and they start to figure out that it's a serial murderer. But again, they didn't catch him until like what, 2010-ish?
Yeah.
I mean, but it's, you know, and they're interviewing serial killers, and the people that are playing them are fucking perfect.
I found that I've shied away from any sort of thing that smacks of like either like procedural or other things like that. I find that they're so omnipresent and so
fair
exploitative in some ways that I find them hard to stay engaged with unless I'm really into an actor or actress that's playing someone, or if there's kind of an overarching thing. So it sounds like something I could enjoy, but I think I didn't seek it out specifically because it felt like it could end up falling into that more like, this is a case, we're presenting it. It's, you know,
there's multiple cases, but a lot of what's going on in that show is them putting together profiles of like trying to put together a national profiling database.
Mhm.
But I do find it like interesting. Like I find Ed Kemper interesting. And they have this conversation with him at one point, and he's so like just mellow, and he's like 6'9". He's gigantic.
Yeah.
And had like a genius intellect.
Yeah.
But he's telling them, hey, the only reason there's something said about like profiling to catch. And he says, as they're interviewing him, he just says, you never would have caught me. The only reason you caught me is because I told you.
Yeah.
I called you because I wanted to be caught, because I didn't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
He's like, that you guys keep expecting every killer to do that. They don't.
No.
So when you say this is the conservative estimate in 19 whatever, how many serial killers, is like, they're wrong. Like, you're just flat wrong.
Yeah.
Because there's people out there who don't want to be caught. And there's people out there who they're not as smart as I am, but they're more careful. He's like, I just wasn't careful and I wanted to get caught.
Yeah.
I turned myself in, because if I didn't do that and I didn't want to get caught, you never would have found me.
Yeah.
And that's so interesting to me, like that there's this idea that, and I agree, this is why I find like true crime to be a little harder to stomach, or based on a true story, because it's just like, oh man, there's people out there who that is how their brain works.
Yeah.
And that to me is, as much as I love things like The Thing and movies like that, there's our Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is another great movie. Nothing is scarier than a human being and what we're capable of.
All right, so I want to wrap up the episode, but I want to wrap it up with what I think would be a good chapter title, because it's both making fun of the two of us as well as a big question about straddling the line between crime, suspense, thriller, and horror. You talked about the sheer size of the man and the fact that he wanted to be caught, and the fact that he very stone cold said, there's people out there that don't want to be caught. Is No Country for Old Men a horror movie?
It is. Anton Chigurh is a slasher.
Yeah.
He just is. And that's a great movie. It's just it's a gussied up slasher movie.
It's a Western slasher, like it's.
To me, it's that was the Coen brothers, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
To me, that's the Coen brothers taking what Carpenter wanted to do and moving it away from kind of that. That in the script, Michael Myers is not called Michael Myers. He's just called The Shape. He's so dehumanized in that script because he's supposed to just be this elemental force. You're not supposed, and this is the thing Carpenter said repetitively, when he started to move that story towards, like I think he said it in an interview, I think this is right, that in his head when he started writing that as a Western, Lee Van Cleef would have been the killer. Because he said Lee Van Cleef is, in all those movies where he is the bad guy, is just so detached.
Yeah.
It's like killing anybody to him is like you're just an obstacle.
Yeah.
And he said
that's
what
what
he
makes
wanted.
Javier Bardem so goddamn terrifying in No Country for Old Men. Yeah.
So he was saying that, when that started to move towards horror, they'd already, like Black Christmas, I think, came out before it, and there was another movie too. And he said, the slasher genre hadn't like exploded yet. So to set himself apart from like the heavy breathing into a phone, like I hate women, killer, which was what was kind of out there, and then also what came out of that, and why I think Halloween is looked at so differently, is Michael Myers comes off like that Shape.
Yeah.
There's nothing there. There's a point where he kills that guy in the ghost outfit, and he's like up in the air, like dangling, and he turns his head like a dog turns its head and looks at you. Like there's just like an animalistic processing. Even when the little kid kills at the beginning of the movie and they take the mask off, there's just a dead stare there holding the knife. Like there's no chance to escape. There's no anger. There's just like, there's nothing there.
Yeah.
He's just a vessel, more or less. And I think that Shigir is that. Bardem plays that part, but with panache.
Yeah.
There seems to be a very low level of like just boiling below the surface, pure malice.
Yeah, yeah.
Like even if I wasn't getting paid for this, I'd probably still be doing it.
Yeah.
Because it's what I know how to do and I enjoy it.
But it's also that Peter Cushing, Sherlock Holmesian, like I know I'm going to win in the end. It's just a matter of how long this takes me. You know, I mean, I think he almost says something like that in the movie. Like this is inevitable, you know, and it's only a matter of how long it's going to take me to execute this.
So slight
what
tangent.
makes it so terrifying that his like complete and utter confidence in success is what is terrifying in that, because you believe it.
Slight tangent, because I'll ask you a question based on yours, just based upon that. Is Thanos a horror character?
No, but I think that the reason that he is so enticing as an antagonist is that same reason. You know, like he's a monster because he 100% believes what he's doing is going to succeed and it's going to be good.
I think maybe in the movies, that version of Thanos, yes, because it is a little bit more like in that Doctor Doom mindset of like, I'm right, and what I'm doing in the long run Magneto's the same way. In the long run, this will pay off for the better. In the comic book, where he's less of a like reset guy and just like, I'm a nihilist. I'm literally in love with the embodiment of death.
Yeah.
I think he's a horror villain because it is just like, I have no respect for humanity, not even for humanity. I have no respect for life. And the only thing I find with Thanos taking him completely out of that is in the comic books, he always tends to plant the seeds for his own defeat. Almost like he wants to lose. Like he's just like, can't quite pull the trigger.
Yeah.
Like I want to do this, but I don't want to do it all the way. Yeah. But I think that when you start talking about someone who is so brilliant and it's, you know, it says things like, I am inevitable, or this is inevitable, this ending is inevitable. I think he kind of falls into the peripheral of that category.
Yeah.
And because of the way they wrote him in these movies, it gives me a great deal of hope of what we'll get from Doctor Doom.
Me too.
He almost falls more into the Doctor Doom mold than the actual comic book version of Thanos.
Yes.
So I don't know. I thought that was like I think maybe Brolin's connection of being in that movie and you saying that, you know, that inevitableness made me go, holy shit, it's very Thanos-like.
Yeah.
Well, we ran the gambit on this one.
Yeah, dude. I don't know. We'll call this maybe we'll call this No Country for Old Men. Maybe we'll call it The Color and the Shape. Oh, not bad. Nice. Plus, I love a good T-Cats Foo Fighters reference. So throw out your monkey wrenches.
Really good.
Really good.